Naszym gościem jest autor tej niezwykłej książki, która okazuje się na naszym rynku, niemiecki dziennikarz Ronald Reng. Książka nosi tytuł Życie, wypuszczone z rąk i jest to historia Roberta Enkego. Być może pamiętacie tego niemieckiego bramkarza, który odszedł od nas na zawsze w roku 2009, bo nie poradził sobie z depresją. To jest temat, który pojawia się w polskich mediach, to jest temat, o którym się mówi. Presja, jaka ciąży na sportowcach, ale są tacy, którzy z tą presją przegrali i o tym właśnie, o tej książce porozmawiamy z Ronaldem. Good to see you, Ronald.
Hey, good to see you. Thanks.
Life Thrown Out of Hands, that's the Polish title. German and English was Life Too Short. Robert Enke was quite a unique sportsman, but also a human being that suffered from depression, and he lost this battle. Do you remember, how did you know about what happened? What were you doing? And because you were a friend with Robert, you knew him very well personally, so do you remember that day?
Yeah, obviously it's a day you will never forget. It was 5 years ago, and on that very day, it was a Tuesday, I was talking to Robert in the morning. I had to phone him for a small thing, and I realized he was agitated when I spoke to him. He didn't really want to speak to me, and I jumped to my own conclusion, thinking he's just agitated because he was driving in the car. In reality, I learned he was agitated because he was on his way to kill himself. And during this phone conversation, which was just 1 minute, he said to me, "I can't talk now, but I call you back later that evening." So I was waiting for him to call me back that evening, and I remember clearly I was in the kitchen cooking tortellini when my phone rang, and I actually thought maybe it's Robert. And it wasn't him, it was a common friend of us who was playing for the national team for Germany, Thomas Hitzelsberger, and he phoned me to break the news that Robert killed himself. And obviously it came to me as a shock, as to everybody, because I didn't knew about his depression. He didn't tell me, he just told maybe 10 people at all. So it came out of the blue to me, and just the next day I learned from his wife what really happened, why he killed himself.
Robert Enke was not just a regular sportsman. He was a very good goalkeeper. He was playing also for Barcelona. He was the big hope for the German national team. Do you know now, how do you think, was there any certain point in his life that decided about his fate?
No, I don't think depression works that way. We who are not suffering from depression, we think lots of times there must be something really tragic happening to him that he decided to take his life. But it was clear from what I learned researching the book that Robert was suffering from depression from an early age on. When he was 16, there were the first depressive moods, and he was not ill for lots of times, but the depression comes back again and again, and sometimes a depression has a clear trigger where there's a clear reason why somebody turns depressive again, and sometimes you never know why exactly. And this was the case with him with his last severe clinical depression in 2009, the one which killed him. In theory, it was one of the happiest times of his life. He just adopted a new daughter. His family was having a daughter again, a child again. He was playing for Germany. The national coach was announcing, "Robert will be my #1 goalkeeper at the World Cup in South Africa." He was playing fantastically for Hanover. The fans loved him at the time, so everything from the outside seemed right. What I learned from psychiatrists is that lots of times with depression, if there's a big change in your life, that can trigger the disease. And that can even be a nice change, a beautiful change. So maybe it was him being called up for to play for Germany as a #1 goalkeeper, which triggered the disease. Maybe it was having a daughter which triggered the disease. So we will never know.
You travel all around Europe to work on this book. You've interviewed more than 40 people about it. Why did you write this book?
Well, we always had this idea to write one day his book, and actually it started with a joke. I was friends with Robert, I gave him one of my books. He read the book and he came back to me saying, "Oh, this is a great book," and I was just embarrassed by his praise, and just to say something, I just said to him, "Oh, one day we're going to write your book," and I thought it was a joke. And I could see in his face he was taking the idea seriously. So that's how it started. And he always came back to me saying, I think this is a good chapter for our book. And I actually didn't realize why the idea of writing the book meant so much to him. In hindsight, now I know, because he was hiding his illness. He felt, I'm Germany's #1 goalkeeper. I can't tell anybody that I'm ill. and he was suffering from imprisoning himself with that knowledge. And he said he was thinking, one day in this book I can tell it all. I can tell people about my illness. So when Robert died, the book was the last thing on my mind. But his wife said this book the idea of the book always meant a lot to Robert. And I think we should tell people the real story, that they understand, hopefully, what depressions are about, what it means to suffer from depression. So Ronnie, can you please write this book and try to explain to people what it is to suffer from depression?
As you were friends with Robert and you're still in touch with his wife and his daughter, was it tough to write this book?
Yes and no. I think I didn't realize at the time how tough it was. I was just on autopilot. I was just doing things automatically. But I spent maybe 10 months doing nothing else but basically living with a dead friend. And obviously I realized later on that it turned me quite bitter, that at the time I was treating maybe other people not rightly. And also being finished with the book was really tough. It felt like I had done everything in my life what is important. I felt like there's no more goal for me to write, so it took me quite a lot to got back to a normal life afterwards. I remember the month afterwards I was going to the office and just listening to the music and not writing anything. And while I was writing, there was the World Cup on in South Africa, where Robert was supposed to play, and I hardly watched any of the games. It was just in the book with Robert.
So what is the biggest lessons that came for you as an author out of this story?
There are many lessons. I think one lesson we need to learn is that it's an illness which can affect anybody, like cancer basically. It doesn't matter how happy you are in life, how many goals you achieved. It doesn't matter if you are a baker, if you're a TV commentator, if you're a professional football player. This illness can affect everybody basically. And another lesson is how difficult it is for people who are suffering from depression to open up about their illness, to admit it to themselves first that they suffer from the illness, and then go to a doctor and seek treatment, because they lots of times think it's they blame themselves. Oh, I've done something wrong that I have this illness, which is obviously rubbish. As I said, it's like with cancer, everybody can get it. So I think we as a society would help people from depression if we treat this illness just as something natural, as something which happens to people.
So, if I understand you correctly, this is much more than just a book for you.
Yes, that's why I'm here and tell people. It became the biggest subject in my life. I think having lost a dear friend like Robert, there needs to be something good coming out of such a tragic death, and that's why his wife and myself, we try, well, not to teach, but to tell people about the illness and hopefully make it a bit easier for people suffering from depression.
So do you just write a story about Robert and what happened, or you just give something inside that can help maybe somebody who's suffering from this illness and reading this book? How do you regard it? Yeah,
I think the idea was just to tell Robert's story, not to make any judgment, just tell it straight and let people see for themselves what it is to suffer from depression. And but I had many reactions, and it really felt good from people suffering from depression who read the book and wrote to me or sent me an email thanking me for the book, saying that it really helped them to realize that even somebody who was keeping goal for Germany, who was apparently such a strong man, and he wasn't somehow a very strong man, that he was going through the same pains and problems like them. So I think hopefully it can help people, and also maybe people living with somebody who is depressed to understand the mind of a depressive person.
Have you heard about Justyna Kowalczyk?
I've been told here in Poland. I didn't know the case before, but obviously having traveled through Europe with that book, every country I came to, people presented me of cases of sportsmen or politicians suffering from depression, and it just shows you that it's quite a common illness. I think statistically every 10th person in the world is suffering from depression at some stage of his life.
Every 10th person in the world?
Suffering, yeah. Some people just have one bout of depression, so they have it for 6 months and they recover from it and will never have it again. And there are other people who suffer it from time to time all their life. So they're, well, totally different expressions of depression, yeah.
How would you advertise your own book, your own story about Robert Enke? What would you say to somebody who knows, yeah, there was a guy whose name was Robert Enke, he killed himself, he was suffering from depression, and that's it. I know nothing more. What would you say to this kind of reader who can get your book in the bookstore?
Yeah, no, it's not a nice thing to advertise yourself, but I was hoping from the reactions which I got from readers that it's more than a football book. I think it's a human life story, and you can read it as somebody just being interested in human life and feel with Robert and hopefully understand a bit of that illness which is so common.
Ronald, thank you very much. Robert Enke, Życie, wypuszczone z rąk. To nie jest zwykła książka sportowa, jak powiedział nasz gość i autor tej książki. Warto sięgnąć do tej historii nie tylko dlatego, że trzeba pamiętać o takich ludziach jak Robert Enke, ale także dlatego, aby wyciągnąć z tego coś dla siebie.